Should hostilities once break out between Japan and the United States, it is not enough that we take Guam and the Philippines, nor even Hawaii and San Francisco. We would have to march into Washington and sign the treaty in the White House,
wrote Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto in January 1941. Those words echoed with confidence in Tokyo's war rooms. 2 years later, on the surface of the Pacific, a very different reality was taking shape. One not fought with battleships and carriers, but beneath the waves. Smoke drifts over the inland sea. Somewhere above, brass bands blare victory marches and rising suns shimmer on steel. But below it all, a steel hull moves with lights off and voices low. Japan's navy may have believed in its surface might, but a quieter, deadlier war had already begun. U.S. submarines, sharpened by radar, night surface doctrine, and audacious captains, would choke Japan's war economy faster than any fleet action. This is not a duel, but a method that starved a nation of oil, ore, and time. The seconds between contact and detonation will drive this story. What Tokyo didn't see coming was a campaign that did its killing where no one could look. Japan's naval thinking pointed the wrong way. Strategy chased a decisive surface battle and neglected convoy defense. Escorts were thin, sonar uneven, depth charges often set too shallow, and long ocean arteries, from the Netherlands East Indies to the home islands, sailed underguarded. Tankers carried the life of the empire. Freighters carried its pulse. When those lanes faltered, factories blinked. Aircraft waited for fuel, and armies stood beside silent trucks. Intelligence analysts felt the shift in shipping statistics before any admiral praised or blamed a tactic. The war's bright center dimmed at its logistical edges. A new attack style emerged. Pace the column on the surface using radar ranges. Execute an end-around to get ahead. Hook inward at pistol range where torpedoes needed little lead. Fire a tight spread, break contact under spray, and reset for a second pass before dawn. This was not luck, but a repeatable sequence that turned caution into pressure, and pressure into results. The change lived in doctrine and in the boats themselves. Balao-class hulls took harsher punishment. Air conditioning kept optics clear and crews alert, and small habitability gains preserved the mental edge needed to run the drill at 3 a.m. Above the waterline, hubris echoed in speeches and victory posters. Below it, a craft culture matured. Checklists tightened, attack plotting improved, damage control rehearsals shaved seconds, and reload drills became muscle memory. 52 American submarines would not return. About 3,500 men would not see home. Their risk-bought leverage no carrier strike could sustain across months. Persistent interdiction at choke points, where the Empire's lifeblood had to pass. Patrol by patrol, proof accumulated. Sink enough tankers and an airbase goes quiet. Cut enough freighters and a division eats less. By 1943, the inland sea's laughter thinned. Convoys ran darker. Reports of missing tankers on routes from Tarakan and Balikpapan multiplied. Staff officers debated causes, mines, aircraft, storms, but wreckage delivered the answer. A welded sequence of process and instrument, intercept plotting, TMA, target motion analysis, disciplined periscope routine, and salvo timing had turned submarines from nuisance into national strategy. Into that context arrives a single name that carried the confidence of the method and the edge of a personality. She would carry the latest radar, the stoutest hull, and a crew trained to turn an analog computer into instinct. Her captain would bring lessons learned under a master and push them one notch bolder. The waves ahead would show whether contempt for underwater toys could survive repeated proof to the contrary. War at sea is solved in darkness by crews who turn motion into numbers and numbers into steel. By late 1942, American boats learned to hunt on the surface at night, where diesel-electric hulls were nearly as fast as merchants and almost invisible against a low horizon. Surface search radar returned contacts as clear marks. The operator's voice fed range and bearing, and the bridge team built an intercept plot that predicted where a convoy would be by the time the boat could knife in. The torpedo data computer, cradled in the conning tower like a protected heart, converted bearing drift and estimated target speed into a firing solution in seconds. The periscope no longer had to tell the entire story. Short exposures confirmed angle on the bow. The rest was the quiet insistence of arithmetic translated into helmsman's orders. Fixes for faulty torpedoes arrived in grinding increments through 1943. Depth settings were corrected. Magnetic pistols were disabled when seas or latitude made them unreliable. And crews learned to trust contact exploders again. Confidence returned, not as bravado, but as discipline. Doctrine shifted. Attack on the surface when possible. Use radar to pace a convoy from outside visual range. Close for a short periscope confirmation. Fire a 4 to 6 fish spread. Then down periscope, hard over. Instructors preached consistency. If the solution cycle is repeatable, results will be too. Boat by boat, the silent service replaced improvisation with a codified approach that any well-trained crew could execute under stress. Japanese merchant shipping moved along a web of arteries. Oil from the Netherlands, East Indies, ore from Manchuria, rice and rubber from Southeast Asia, and troops shuttled to threatened fronts. Without a consistently enforced convoy system until late 1943, the first waves of interdiction were devastating. Even when convoys formed, escorts were too few. Sonar training inconsistent and air patrol coverage thin. Lookouts relied on night eyesight and habit. American radar negated both. The ocean's scale hid nothing from a patient hunter. A contact found at 30,000 yards could be shadowed for hours, while the intercept plot tightened into a point-blank approach that left little room for a target to think. Coordination matured. Radios that once threatened to give away positions became lifelines, as low-power transmissions and disciplined brevity enabled wolfpack operations. Intelligence, assisted at times by code-breaking, helped submarines pre-position along choke lines like the Luzon Strait and the Bungo Sweeto. When a contact report went out, nearby boats adjusted courses to form a loose net. One boat fixed the convoy's course and speed. Another performed an end-around. A third waited along the predicted track for a second strike. The aim was not a cinematic melee, but a series of connected blows that forced the enemy to choose between protecting the front of the convoy and the rear, between rescuing survivors and saving cargo. The change was also industrial. Balao-class construction accelerated, bringing thicker pressure hulls, better habitability, improved batteries, and reliable air conditioning that prevented condensation from fogging optics and corroding circuits. Crews could endure longer patrols in tropical heat without losing alertness, and the boat's deeper test depths granted tactical options under depth charge attack. Torpedoes improved as well. With settings corrected, skippers could plan spreads by computing lead, gyro angle, and intended track crossing in deliberate patterns that built redundancy into each salvo. The vocabulary of success was no longer luck, but lead computation, salvo timing, and break-off turn. Through 1943, the rhythm took hold. Radar contact at night, silent approach on the surface, a short periscope check to confirm the target's angle on the bow, spread planning based on bearing rate, and a hard turn away as detonations rose into the night. Escorts reacted late because the attack origin was not a visible periscope track, but an unseen surface silhouette. When escorts did close, helmsmen used a knifing S-turn, dived to place a thermal layer between themselves and sonar, and rigged for quiet while crewmen counted the thuds of depth charges and bled off noise from pumps. Minutes later, the boat would be back on the scope line, resetting the intercept for another strike or sliding away to pass the contact to a partner. Success compounded, and with it, purpose. American submarines, never numerous, punched above their weight because every successful attack had economic aftershocks. A lost tanker meant grounded aircraft weeks later. A sunken freighter meant an infantry regiment short of food and ammunition far from home. By the end of 1943, the silent service had proved that persistence could do what a single battle could not. The stage is now set for a hull and a commanding officer who fused aggression and calculation into a razor. The processes were ready. The people to apply them had arrived. We are ready for a name that turned doctrine into legend. Balao-class boat commissioned in the final quarter of 1943. A captain who had learned under a mentor famous for audacity. Together they would press the sequence of intercept plot, approach run, fire control solution, and break off to its maximum effect. The next chapter introduces the submarine that made even confident convoys feel hunted, a boat called Tang. Commissioned in October 1943, the Balao-class USS Tang, SS-306, slid into a Pacific already learning to respect the dark. She carried the newest tools into the oldest killing ground, shipping lanes that fed empires. Her captain, Richard H. O'Kane, brought a style formed as executive officer under Dudley Mush Morton in USS Wahoo, aggression wrapped in discipline, risk bounded by preparation. On Tang's bridge, radar operators and lookouts drilled until range rate estimates felt like heartbeat counts, until an intercept plot could be sketched in the mind while the hands did other work. The torpedo data computer's cams and gears hummed like a second pulse in the conning tower. The crew learned to trust it because they had practiced until trust was the easiest option. Training was relentless because surprise loves the crew that rehearses the most. Attack plotting sessions ran on dog-eared boards. Men practiced end-around calculations until they could copy a convoy track in their heads. Reload drills crushed minutes into seconds. Damage control teams rehearsed flooding responses by muscle memory. Isolate, shore up, report. The goal was not heroics but repeatability. When a contact appeared, Tang would not invent. She would execute. Crewmen learned to trust the analog brain and to keep the periscope routine short. Seconds of exposure, not minutes of temptation. On the surface, O'Kane favored pacing at night with the boat trimmed low, a dusky shape that horizon haze swallowed whole. Early patrols proved the pattern. Shadow the convoy by night beyond visual detection, using SJ ranges to pace like a predator off a herd's flank. When the moment came, knife inward at pistol shot distance where torpedoes needed little computation to hit. Fire a tight spread, favoring overlapping intercepts that built insurance into the salvo. Then break contact hard, turning off the convoy's track to deny immediate counterattack, and reset. Japanese escorts countered with depth charges that often detonated too shallow, their explosions thundering above, while Tang slipped under a thermal layer that bent sonar pings astray. Lookouts peered into darkness that radar had already stripped of secrets. Tokyo's chart tables saw only fragments, a ship late to port, a convoy that radioed an attack and then went silent. Inside those fragments, a method matured. O'Kane trimmed the periscope to a whisper of wake, accepting seconds of view to reduce silhouette. He taught the bridge to trust radar ranges over adrenaline, and to accept that hesitation is its own hazard. He insisted that the conning tower remain quiet enough to hear the slap of waves against the bow and the change in engine note that signaled speed. Calm-bred accuracy. Accuracy-bred survival. Each attack became a case study filed against complacency. Tang's interior carried the smell of fuel oil, hot paint, and coffee that tasted of copper after too many hours on the plate. Men slept inches from torpedoes and woke to the click of the TDC's servo motors as officers refined a solution. The boat's deeper test depth offered confidence in evasions. Her air conditioning cut the mugginess that fogged optics and dulled minds in tropical water. Little things mattered. A clearer lens, a steadier hand, a crew unafraid to execute a second end-around while escorts were still debating where the first salvo came from. The boat's bell rang with a particular certainty when O'Kane ordered a turn-in. By then, the bridge team already had the numbers. By early 1944, Tang's patrol reports read like case studies in applied doctrine. She approached, fired, and lived to fire again. The nickname many Japanese officers used, underwater toys, no longer matched the evidence. The toy had become a tool, and in O'Kane's hands that tool behaved like a scalpel. Losses in certain lanes forced the enemy to reroute, to slow, to add scarce escorts. Every adjustment carried a cost somewhere else. Factories waited for oil that would not come. Airbases waited for avgas that never arrived. Soldiers waited on piers for ships that had been counted but would not dock. None of it looked spectacular from a distance. There were no massed fleets exchanging broadsides, no headlines announcing a decisive day. But a decisive outcome was building, measured in missed shipments and silent radios. Tang stood at the intersection of instrument and instinct, of processes rehearsed and moments seized. She was not alone. Dozens of American boats were grinding down the same problem. Yet Tang's tempo, accuracy, and willingness to press close made her emblematic of the campaign's evolution, from scattered success to relentless strangulation. The next patrols would make the point unmistakable. In weather that flattened sound, and under a moon that barely marked wave tops, Tang would carry night surface doctrine to its logical limit. The laughter that had once followed the phrase underwater toys would find no echo on those nights, only the flash of detonations and the long, low roar of burning cargo. Ahead lies the chapter where night itself becomes a weapon, and where a single boat forces an entire shipping system to think like prey. A black sea, a thin moon, a convoy framed in radar like prey lantern eyes. This is where laughter dies. Tang runs low in the water, bow wave whispering. Bridge crew hooded by the night. The SJ operator calls range in steady beats that feel like a second heartbeat. The contact is a column of freighters with 2 escorts weaving a loose screen. O'Kane holds station outside visual detection, building a clean radar plot, while the conning tower team refines target motion analysis from bearing drift. The approach stays on the surface. Speed is life here, and at night a submarine trimmed down is nearly invisible. The plan is familiar but never casual. End around to get ahead without being seen. Hook inward toward the convoy's soft side. Compress the firing window to pistol shot range, and leave a wake of decisions the enemy cannot make fast enough. The sea around the Philippines is warm, the air thick, the horizon a smudge. Tang advances with bridge whisper discipline. No metal on metal, no raised voices, just procedure. A short periscope exposure makes the final confirmations of angle on the bow. The torpedo data computer hums through its solution cycle, cams aligning as the helmsman rides the numbers. Spread planning is tight, overlapping tracks that build redundancy into the salvo, so a single misestimate does not buy a miss. When the order comes, tubes empty in a cadence that feels like a drum line under the skin. Seconds stretch. Then dull, heavy detonations lift columns of spray into the night. A freighter shudders and stops. Another heels over, lights winking out as steam tears through her innards. The escorts hesitate, telescopes to a place that no longer exists. Tang is already knifing off the convoy track, creating a knuckle of turbulence to foul sonar, and diving just far enough to sit under a thermal layer that bends sound. Pumps thrum softly. The first depth charges go off too shallow, rage detonating against a surface silhouette that is no longer there. By mid-1944, this pattern has become the service signature across the Pacific. Hunting on the surface at night extends the boat's reach, turns every convoy's flank into an opening, and shortens the timeline between contact and attack. When conditions favor quiet, electric torpedoes leave no wake. When speed and range demand punch, steam torpedoes do the brutal work. Either way, the discipline holds. Short periscope routine, fire control solution confirmed by radar range rate, salvo timing that staggers impacts across the column, hard rudder to break contact, then a reset for a second bite if the screen loses coherence. In those minutes, Japan's merchant empire bleeds into water older than empires. Ashore, the effect expresses itself in mundane ways that cannot be bombed out of memory. Ration lines lengthen. Factory managers report idle hours when oil fails to arrive. Training flights are cut. Frontline units hoard fuel. Convoy schedules multiply acronyms, High Moda Kemba, as escorts try to stitch order onto scarcity. The defenses evolve. More zigzagging, more random course changes, a reliance on darkness and radio silence as if the ocean itself might be armor. But night-running doctrine takes those habits and turns them into vulnerabilities. Darkness only hides what cannot be sensed, and American radar erases that hiding place. Silence only protects what cannot be predicted, and a patient intercept plot predicts without listening. The silent service pays in blood for this pressure. 52 boats will not return, and about 3,500 men will carry the Pacific in their last view. Every attack risks a counterattack. Every success invites a louder response next time. Evasion becomes its own art. Helmsmen put deliberate noise into the water to confuse bearing estimates, then cut everything that hums. Depth is no panacea. It is a choice among limits. The discipline of damage control, isolating lines, shoring bulkheads, rehearsing casualty reports until the language itself becomes calm. keeps hulls intact long enough for escorts to lose interest or lose contact. Numbers sharpen the narrative. Across 1944, U.S. submarines account for the majority of Japan's merchant tonnage losses, far more than aircraft or surface raiders, despite being a small fraction of Navy manpower. The leverage lies in persistence and placement. Choke points such as the Luzon Strait, the Formosa Strait, and the Bungo Sweeto become ambush alleys. Wolf packs add a collaborative layer. One boat fixes course and speed. Another moves ahead to cut. A third waits along the predicted track. Even without radio, a lone boat like Tang can act as its own small net by striking, braking, and re-engaging before the convoy regains coherence. The doctrine scales all the way up to national policy. Starve the empire so that battles need not be fought at full strength later. By the time staff officers in Tokyo realize the scale of the hemorrhage, the remedies require fuel and escorts they no longer have. The columns grow smaller and slower. The ocean does not. Against that backdrop, individual patrols take on symbolic weight. A single boat's rhythm can stand for the campaign's argument. Tang embodies that rhythm. Her bridge crew trusts instruments over adrenaline, procedures over guesswork, patience over showmanship. The next run will show the doctrine at full tempo. Speed, audacity, and a closing move so clean, it reads like a manual. Until an irony no manual can prevent arrives to write a final line with the wrong signature. Ahead lies a patrol remembered not only for what it sank, but for how fate took its last turn. By late 1944, the shipping map of the Japanese Empire reads like a medical chart after too many infarctions. Lines that once pulsed with oil from Borneo and Sumatra, or from Manchuria, and cargo from Shanghai to Yokohama now show gaps where ships never arrived. The high convoy system, hurried into existence, pairs escorts to merchants across the South China Sea and through the Formosa Strait. But pairing is not protection when escorts are too few, depth charges old, and sonar teams undertrained. Aviation coverage flickers with fuel scarcity. Every added knot of zigzag costs endurance that tank farms cannot replace. The result is a defense that looks busy and remains porous. American submarines steer toward pressure points where traffic concentrates by necessity. Intelligence helps, sometimes from decrypted schedules, often from patrol patterns observed over months. The Luzon Strait becomes a turnstile through which troopships and tankers must pass to feed the Philippines front. The Bungo Sweeto offers a doorway to the inland sea. Shanghai approaches funnel commerce past predictable waypoints. Tang enters this environment with a method tuned for narrows. Hold contact beyond visual detection. Set the end around early while there is room, and accept that an approach inside 1,000 yards multiplies both the chance of a hit and the punishment of a miss. Radar gives O'Kane an edge in understanding the convoy's internal rhythm. Column spacing, escort weave patterns, the interval between zigzag legs. Each detail turns into an approach run squeezed into minutes. Spread planning at 800 to 1,000 yards reduces dependence on a perfect estimate of target speed. Shots are aimed not at single ships but at lanes where ships must be by the time steel crosses water. After the salvo, Tang cuts a gouging turn off the track, throws a ballast change to shift depth rapidly, and lets a thermal layer catch her like a cloak. If escorts rush the last known bearing, that bearing is already obsolete. The enemy adapts. More escort groups are formed, often with older destroyers doubling as convoy guardians. Mines are sown in approaches. Aircraft try night sweeps with searchlights and crude radar. But every adaptation spends something Japan has less of. Fuel for patrols, steel for replacements, trained crews for escorts. Protecting one convoy means leaving another thin. Routing around predicted ambushes burns time and fuel that factories cannot spare. Meanwhile, American industrial muscle puts more Balao-class hulls to sea and fixes the last of the torpedo reliability issues. The service culture hardens as well. Attack plotting is taught as a craft, not a hunch, and crews arriving on station now inherit a playbook written in lost ships and lives. In this climate, even cautious skippers can score. Aggressive ones rewrite ledgers. Tang presses every edge that doctrine allows. Closing inside 1,000 yards is a commitment to clarity. The periscope shows target plates, not just silhouettes. The TDC's solution cycle becomes almost ceremonial. Verify angle on the bow, settle the platform. Commit to gyro angles that put metal where the convoy cannot avoid it. The reward is immediacy. Impacts land so quickly that escorts have no time to build an accurate picture. Confusion, once a luxury for the hunter, becomes a tool. Merchantmen turn against each other's paths. A damaged ship blocks a lane. The screen splits to chase phantoms. Tang uses the split as an exit. The numbers that filter back into Japanese staff rooms are not just tonnage totals. They are effects felt 2 and 3 echelons away. Aviation gasoline shortages force training cuts. Aerial reconnaissance range shrinks. Army logistics officers report delayed deployments and piecemeal arrivals. Sugar, rice, coal. Civilian items that once moved routinely join the queue of things rationed or delayed. The empire that sprinted across the map in 1941 now crawls through its own home waters in 1944, cautious and slow. Each convoy becomes a gamble. Move enough cargo to justify the risk, but not so much that the loss becomes a public wound. Tang's patrol reports in this period read with a spare confidence born of repetition. Contact established. End around executed. Approach on the surface. Short periscope routine. Salvo fired at close range. Evasion under a layer. Reset for second attack. The style isn't theatrical. It's professional. That professionalism carries its own theater when read against the enemy's assumptions. The phrase underwater toys no longer fits. The toy has teeth, and the bite is measured in factories idled and divisions slowed. This is the stage on which October 1944 arrives, with the Formosa Strait pulsing as Japan shuttles troops and fuel toward the Philippines, while trying to nurse the home economy. The water is crowded, the risks high, the opportunities sharper than ever. Tang takes station in this corridor with a crew that has rehearsed the same sequences, until they flow without friction, stacked like cards ready to deal. Single patrol will be asked to shoulder more than its share of the campaign's argument. It will succeed beyond any reasonable measure. And then, in one arc that veterans of every service know too well, success will meet the indifferent caprice of machinery and sea. The next chapter opens at dawn and ends before dawn, with a ledger of kills and a last line no one aboard could control. A periscope feather at dawn. 5 ships blaze by noon. This patrol will end with the cruelest twist in submarine lore. In October 1944, the Formosa Strait is thick with traffic bound to feed the Philippines campaign and the home island's exhausted appetite. Tang settles into a rhythm that transforms doctrine into tempo. Radar ranges fall into place like metronome ticks. The intercept plot draws itself in the minds of men who have traced it 100 times on boards and in notebooks. O'Kane accepts proximity as the price of certainty. Inside 1,000 yards, even an imperfect estimate yields a hit. Inside 800, the salvo becomes a hammer rather than a bet. The first night resembles a lesson more than a battle. Contact is made outside visual detection. An end-around uses speed and darkness to reach the convoy's forward quarter. A short periscope exposure confirms angle on the bow. The TDC's solution cycle finishes with the steady confidence of experience. 4 fish run hot, straight, and unwavering. Impacts strike in staggered beats that the crew can count without seeing. A transport grinds to a stop as fires climb her superstructure. A tanker folds into itself with a roar that vibrates the control room's thin metal skin. Escorts close on where the attacker was, not where the attacker is. Tang turns off the track, drops just enough to let a thermal layer soak sound, then paces the convulsion from the outside until lanes open for a second pass. The day that follows brings wreckage and an eerie calm. Survivors cling to debris. Escorts search by habit more than plan. Tang uses the lull to reset, plan reloads, and review the night's solutions for the next approach. The boat's interior is a ritual of metal and sweat. Torpedoes slide forward under guides. Grease smells rise. Men speak in clipped phrases because they are saving attention for the next approach. Coffee tastes metallic from the cup that never cools. The TDC gets a check it does not need. Operators verify practice they do not doubt. Confidence here is not a feeling but a database of repetitions. Night returns. Another convoy. The approach is more complicated. The screen a little tighter. The zigzag pattern a little less predictable. It does not matter. The intercept plot absorbs the changes. The approach run adapts. Tang's bow cuts in at an angle chosen to equalize two risks at once: target evasion and escort closure. Spread planning assigns one fish to a probable lane change, the others to steady courses. When the salvo runs, Tang keeps speed to reduce exposure time. The detonations stack again into a rhythm the crew knows too well to celebrate. A freighter breaks in half. Another lists as cargo blows through hatch covers. The ocean lights with fire that reflects on faces in the bridge wind. There is no sound in the voice that orders the break-off turn, only cadence. Reports credited to this patrol will later list multiple sinkings on a single run, climaxing a record that already marked Tang among the war's most lethal boats. The raw numbers tell part of the story. The atmosphere tells the rest. The surfline glows with burning fuel. The air smells of scorched paint and steamed salt. Escorts choose between rescuing and chasing, and in choosing do neither well. Tang slides into the gaps their indecision creates. Her crew, drilled past the point of fatigue, holds to the sequence that the campaign itself depends on: contact, end-around, approach, solution, salvo, evasion, reset. The insult once tossed across wardrooms, underwater toys, has turned into a private joke the enemy can no longer afford. And yet the sea has its indifference. Machines have their limits. Circular runs are a known risk with certain torpedoes, a malfunction in guidance that turns a weapon back toward the bow that loosed it. Crews train for evasive turns the instant a run looks wrong, but training is a hand raised against chance. In the early hours that follow the triumph, Tang lines up one more shot at short range, aiming to finish a damaged ship and clear the strait for an exit. The TDC confirms what eyes already know. The tube cycle, awake the crew cannot see, begins in silence and continues in the same, but the operator's ear hears a note that does not match memory. The minute stretches like wire pulled tight. The helmsman throws the boat into a hard turn to starboard, a maneuver drilled for this nightmare. The bridge team strips the horizon for signs of the running track. Deep inside the hull, men hold to procedures that feel like prayers only from the outside. With a defect no one aboard can influence, steel obeys its own logic. The next chapter will mark a single shock with a violence that erases the line between weapon and target. The water does not care that this patrol was near perfect. It will answer in its own language. The sea gives. The sea takes with a dark sense of humor that men respect because they cannot bargain with it. In the early hours of 25 October 1944, during a close-range surface attack in the Formosa Strait, Tang fires a final torpedo. The run looks clean for a beat too long, and then the telltale oddity asserts itself. A guidance failure that bends the weapon into a slow sickle turn. Circular run risks are not theoretical in this era. Crews rehearse emergency maneuvers precisely for this moment. O'Kane orders the turn that doctrine prescribes. The bridge team steers with brutal economy, and the conning tower crew strips away extraneous talk as if quiet itself can change physics. It cannot. The ocean keeps its scale. The weapon keeps its curve. Impact comes as a single, concentrated blow near the stern. The hull shudders through every frame. Lights flicker. Air becomes water in a corridor that only minutes before was routine space. Compartment doors slam. Flooding boundaries are set and reset as reports come in. The order of actions matters more than the fear those actions contain. Pumps start where they can start. Lines are isolated where hands can reach. Men brace and shore in postures they have practiced under fluorescent lamps, now performed by feel in a thunder of steel against steel. The boat bucks, balances, and begins to settle. Control in moments like this survives on procedure. The crew follows damage control checklists they could recite in sleep. They account for men. They report by stations even as stations disappear behind green water. Some find the forward hatch and the conning tower route. Others are trapped by angles the hull never knew in training. As water pushes into places it was only ever supposed to pass, every decision becomes a count of seconds. There is no theater here, only work. A handful make it out. Many do not. Tang's survivors, including O'Kane, are scattered across the surface as the strait returns to its wide indifference. Rescue is a matter of who reaches whom first, and in whose hands the ropes end. Several will be pulled from the water by the enemy and carried into captivity for the war's final months. The irony is sharp enough to be a lesson without sarcasm. The most ruthless hunter of Japan's convoys dies not by enemy gunnery or depth charge, but by a friendly bite, a weapon's failure at the worst possible moment. It is a risk the service knows. It is a risk the service accepts because every weapon has failure modes, and war is a sum of risks managed rather than eliminated. The loss does not change the verdict of the campaign. Even as Tang sinks, other boats are cutting through lifelines along the South China Sea. In the Bungo Sweeto, across approaches to the inland sea, patrol reports still fill with ranges, bearings, spread plans, and break-off turns. Attacks continue because the method is not embodied in one hull. It is distributed across a fleet that has learned the same steps. News of Tang's disappearance returns home in fragments, and then in stark confirmation. Within the service, grief and pride sit beside each other without resolving. The record stands, an extraordinary patrol history culminating in a sequence of sinkings that any boat would count as a career. The ending stands too because the sea does not negotiate with narrative. O'Kane will survive and spend the remainder of the war as a prisoner, one man among many who carry the campaign's memory in scars and in stories that won't be told as dialogue, but as lessons to the next generation of submariners. The Medal of Honor will later hang on a chest that also carries the weight of those who did not come back. What matters to the broader war is not only the names etched into plaques, but the proof that the method worked. Japan's shipping crisis deepens independent of any one boat's fate. Convoys shorten and slow. The economy's pulse weakens. Coastal waters thicken with mines and patrols that try to seal lanes after too many hemorrhages. The arithmetic that underwrites modern war, fuel in, goods out, fails day by day. By early 1945, the home islands resemble a fortress starved by its moat. The acoustics of the Pacific change too. Fewer screws beat distant rhythms. More harbors echo with emptiness. Against that soundscape, Tang's loss feels like a bell rung once, the note lingering because of the silence that follows. The campaign is not finished, but its conclusion is visible in the ledgers that planners consult at dawn. The last chapter belongs to numbers and to the quiet in which numbers do their work. It will tally what undersea craft, 2% of the Navy's personnel, did to the arteries of an empire, and how a set of processes executed with relentless discipline can do what a grand fleet action promises, but cannot sustain. It will return to the thesis that the loudest battles roared above the waves, yet the decisive strangling happened below them, in places where triumph and disaster share the same color of night. Numbers sometimes sound colder than explosions, but they carry the argument to its end. U.S. submarines, about 2% of the Navy's personnel, sank the majority of Japan's merchant shipping and a substantial share of its warships. At the price of 52 boats and roughly 3,500 men, the leverage was not in size but in process. Intercept plots refined on dark bridges, radar plots built beyond eyesight, end-around maneuvers that turned patience into position, target motion analysis that converted bearing drift into intention, fire control solutions from the torpedo data computer that made seconds count, salvo timing that layered redundancy over uncertainty, evasive patterns that use thermal layers and knuckles of disturbed water to break sonar locks. It reads like a checklist because it was one. Doctrine applied with discipline over time becomes policy written in enemy ledgers. By 1945, the effect is visible at every scale. Tankers lost in 1944 translate into idle factories in 1945. Idle factories mean fewer aircraft, fewer engines, fewer replacement parts. Training hours shrink because aviation gasoline is scarce. Army transport suffers because freighters do not arrive. A fortress without supply is a museum of weapons. The home islands, defended by fervor and geography, are isolated by physics and arithmetic. Convoy routes once described as lifelines are now risk lines. The Empire's map remains large on paper and small in motion. Meanwhile, the silent service carries on with the same modest tone that marked its patrol reports. There are no massed parades for men who hunted mostly alone, who listened more than they spoke, who trusted instruments and process under a ceiling of water that allowed no errors. The culture that emerged from early war failures refused drama and embraced rehearsal. It taught short periscope routines instead of lingering looks, target speed estimation from bow wave angle instead of guesswork, solution cycles finished before adrenaline could argue for one more degree. It trusted that repeatable actions beat dramatic instincts in a craft where visibility is a luxury and consequences arrive at the speed of sound. Japanese anti-submarine warfare improved, but not quickly or broadly enough. Escort numbers never matched need. Sonar training lagged behind the curve of loss. Aircraft radar and coordination suffered under fuel scarcity and industrial attrition. Mines and coastal patrols complicated approaches, yet could not block wide seas. Even late-war convoy systems created by necessity burned resources faster than they prevented loss. The nation that planned for a decisive battle among fleets found itself losing a sustained contest of throughput, contested at night by small crews whose victories were measured in ships that never docked. Richard O'Kane survived captivity to explain not heroics, but habits. He became a teacher of the same plain virtues his patrols displayed: rehearsed plotting, disciplined approach runs, attention to the mundane details that keep analog systems honest in tropical heat and salt air. His Medal of Honor does not contradict his insistence that success belonged to crews, and to a method larger than any one officer or hull. Tang's story is dramatic because of its end. Its meaning lies in the run of nights before that end. When process outperformed pride and the line between risk and recklessness stayed bright. The chapter does not close with a single explosion, but with a ledger balanced in silence. When modern states fight, the winner is often the side that keeps its routes open, and the other side's routes shut. The Pacific confirmed this brutal simplicity. Aircraft carriers drew the eyes. Amphibious landings marked maps. But below the noise, submarines altered the war's metabolism. Oil stops, steel starves, factories dim. Aircraft do not fly. Armies do not move. The decisive move was not a spectacle. It was an accumulation. A night after night after night, when men in steel tubes used instruments and practiced steps to move a firing point 100 yards closer, a second faster, a degree truer. The thesis that opened this story rests unchanged. Early war contempt labeled American submarines underwater toys. Innovation in sensors and weapons, doctrine that favored night surface approaches, and captains who treated caution as a variable rather than a default turned those craft into the decisive strangler of Japan's war economy. Silence beat spectacle, process beat pride. And in the echo that lingers long after radios stop and wakes flatten, one sentence remains to carry the film's memory forward. The toys grew teeth, and an empire learned their bite.